Hello and welcome. This is David with Ag Economic Insights, chatting with you today about the question of the week. This week, we're talking about gasoline consumption again. And as we've mentioned before, I think this is one of the most important charts to think about for the summer of 2020. Gasoline consumption has been a good indicator of economic activity, both during the slowdown, but also the recovery in the last few months of data. It also has a lot of implications for corn corn usage as the more gasoline we consume, the more ethanol that gets blended into that gasoline consumption. The more ethanol we blend, the more corn we use. So I'm going to go to the data, and here's a chart that we've been updating on a pretty regular basis for AEI premium users. This is the weekly gasoline consumption data. You've been seeing it a lot on Twitter and social media. I think this chart's really helpful to take a look at. First is the 2020 data. As you can see, it fell really hard here in late March, early April, and then we started to see that recovery into May and early June. And then what we've been talking about the last few months is that stall out. We've had this stall at about 8.6, 8.7 million barrels, hit a bit of a plateau or a window there. And as it pertains to the Forecast Network question, we were running out of time. We had some questions closing at the 1st of September. But here, the most recent data broke through that 9 million barrel threshold, got to 9.1 million barrels. And a couple things I want to point out with this chart. First, we just saw that peak in summer usage with the 5-year average. And we typically see a slide in consumption. It gets as low as 9 million barrels for the 5-year average here in 4 or 6 weeks from now. So the first thing is we saw an uptick whenever typically consumption starts to slide. The second one, that uptick puts us in that 5-year range. Now there's a big variance in the 5-year range this time of the year, but we're starting to get to something that's more normal. Now there are going to be a lot of debates and arguments as to have we got back to normal yet. We'll leave those to you, but I think we finally got into a place where we can start to have that debate. And so this is the first level of what might be normal here for gasoline consumption. So let's jump over the Forecast Network question. The scores for this question that just got closed was the probability of gasoline consumption exceeding 9 million barrels between May and August. We provide all the background data, and of course this happened. You can see my forecasts. I was pretty optimistic, especially after we saw that jump in consumption in May and June. And I held my forecasts solid when we hit that stall out period, started to make some small adjustments, and finally, just about 10 days ago, I really adjusted my forecast lower as the previous week's data was just stuck there at 8.6 million barrels. Of course, the consensus here, the average of what other users were telling us, was not nearly as optimistic as mine. In fact, I was looking at Brent's data, and he was not nearly as optimistic on this as I was. So something I learned is I maybe was a little too optimistic on this, and I maybe held on to it a little too long. But here's my expectations. I'm glad. I guess if I'd have held my forecast at 70 or 80% the last month or so, I probably would have got the high score. Could have sent myself some of our own swag, but I didn't. I adjusted it because we were running out of time. I'm glad I made that adjustment, given we were starting to get close to the end of that timing. But this is one I'm definitely going to learn a lot about. So we also asked, this was the 9 million barrel question. This is sort of this idea of getting back to something normal. We also still have open the 10 million barrel question. And this, of course, if you think back to that chart we just looked at, that would have been a high end of a sharp recovery and pent up demand. We had 2 questions zeroed in on this. And as you can see, this consensus was less optimistic about this, and I was as well. It's a pretty low event. We still have a couple weeks of data, but it's a pretty low probability event happening. And so I think to summarize where we've been in the gasoline consumption, I think the recovery has been slower and more lagged than what a lot of us, including myself, might have initially thought and what some of that initial data was showing us. And it, of course, leaves a lot of questions as to what we can expect in the coming weeks and months. Will we see this seasonal trend play out? Will we see this pent-up demand come through? we see this retreat was just sort of a blip on the radar screen. So a lot of questions, a lot of unknowns, but I think one of the things that we can definitely chalk up as a lesson learned is that this recovery didn't happen nearly as fast as a lot of us would have thought. So stay tuned, update your forecasts if you're a user of the Forecast Network tool. If not, take advantage of our 14-day trial to get in, to get access to all the premium content, but also this tool to help sharpen your thinking and cultivate your ideas. Thanks so much.